Well, without further ado, Skyhawk, are you ready?
I think we're ready.
Ooh.
Well then, hello everyone. This is the Mapmaking Spotlight show that we are going to be running tentatively at this point bi-weekly every Sunday, where we talk about various cool things in mapmaking and cool things people have done with mapmaking. I, as many of you probably know, am AvengedRuler. Skyhawk.
And I am Skyhawk. I occasionally make gimmick maps.
And today we're going to be talking about the particle editor and what some various people have done with it in the past.
Yeah, so I think I'm actually going to start off talking about that because just kind of seeing what you can do with the particle editor will kind of frame talking about how to use it. So the first map I want to show off is called The Jaunt by C, and already you can kind of see a little bit of some interesting particle stuff just in these teleporter spots, but the real big particle thing in this level that I want to show off is this right here.
Yeah, and from my perspective, this is one of the most, really obvious examples of it, because you can really see kind of just how these particles are moving around.
Yeah. So there's kind of two parts to this, and we're going to talk about both of them. It's the modified special particles that they're using, and also the wind triggers that's making them move. So we'll cover the wind as well, because those seem to get used a lot with the particles in the particle editor. And let's maybe look at one more map. I'm just trying to decide which one I want to look at first. Let's look at this Delo map. Here. So one of the other things you can do with the particle editor is change what default particles are emitted by things. So you can see here that the particles from these prisms has been modified. So instead of the big virtual particles, you've got these little firefly explosions.
Yeah, and this can be really useful if you're trying to get rid of clutter in a map. I know I've definitely had that problem where I've just ended up changing the fog trigger colors to get rid of them.
Alright, so now we've seen some examples of what it can do. Let's take a look at how it works. So let's make a new map. And so the first thing that you're going to need is go to the particle menu, go to the trigger menu, excuse me, and place a particle trigger. And it only has two options: capture particle state and apply particle state. Apply particle state is just for kind of looking at what's in that trigger. So if you have multiple of them, then you can kind of switch between them by applying. And capture is for saving it. So whatever the current particle status is, that's going to get saved into the trigger, and then it'll work just like a fog trigger or anything else. So to actually get editing particles, what we want to do is hit F5, and that'll open up this spooky menu with a lot of buttons. But it breaks down pretty easily into different pieces. So over on the left here is the first major thing. We have a list of emitter types. So we can see emitter name and ID number. And this is every single thing that emits particles in the game. So let me get some just instances of these. Let's say leaf ground and polygon ground.
And to be clear, these aren't necessarily limited to emitters specifically. They control basically everything in the game in something called an emitter.
Yeah. So if we actually place some entities here as well, and some surface dust, why not? Let's get that. Then if we go back into the particle editor menu again with F5, we can see that it shows an emitter box for the entities as well, and for the surface dust. So if we click on one of these emitters, it'll show us the name polygon ground and the ID 70. And the ID is just useful for finding it in this list again, because this list is extremely long. And if we click on the entity, we can see here we have a stone boss emitter. It's because he's emitting leaves. Or the gargoyle small emitter. Or the slime ground emitter. I think, is this key bindable? Or is it, wait, there we go. No, it is not bindable. So you do need an F5 button if you want to use this.
Seems like a bit of an oversight.
Maybe. That could possibly change in the future, who knows? Alright, so now we have all of these different emitters on the screen. How do we change what they do? So, first thing is over on this left side we have the emitter options, and this controls everything that shares this emitter type, leaf ground. So the two options here are sliders with a min and a max, and it'll pick a random value between those two things. So for example, speed here, we have slightly positive speed, anywhere from kind of this low number to this low number for speed, but we can change this so that leaves can have any speed from low to extremely fast. So now we can see that there are some leaves that just explode out from the emitter, whereas some still just kind of move slowly. Or if we wanted, we could have some of them moving in the direction of the emitter or in the opposite direction. We could have some of them moving backwards and some of them moving forwards. So we can kind of have this range of values to get it looking more natural and random. And then same thing with the density. The further right you move it, the more dense the emitter becomes. So if we have just full on density, we just get way too many leaves. Or we could make it super low and just have the occasional leaf coming out of it. And this third option is a pretty neat control. So the main red line here is the direction that the particles move in. Let me just get these set up again so that you can actually see. Let's make them move a little bit faster. There we go. So if I change this red line's direction, then it changes which direction the leaves are blown in. And then there are these secondary gray lines on either side of it, and that is the spread. So you can see how they're not all perfectly moving in this same direction. They're kind of moving out in a V shape to either side. And that's controlled with right-clicking this. So if I right-click this, I can move these gray lines and change how much these spread. So if I want them all moving in the same direction, I can have it something like this. Or if I want just every random direction, I could even get it to the opposite side. And already this gives us some pretty good control over the emitters. Like if you just wanted to change the behavior of how these particles come out of this emitter, then that's enough. But that is not the limit of what you can do with these. Before I talk about this right-hand menu though, I will mention how to save these changes. So now that we've changed all of our settings for this, if we come back to our trigger and we click capture, then it is now saved in this trigger, and we could even have multiple triggers, and we can have different settings saved in each one. So now if I go back to the particle editor, I change this to say I want these to be moving slowly and all in the same direction. Then I can go to my trigger and save this particle state. Now when I come into the map, if I walk into this trigger, then we get the explosive behavior, and if we walk into this trigger, we get this falling behavior. So you can have different things happen at different parts of your map, similar to fog triggers. Alright, so on to the next part. If there's any questions about that so far?
Not seeing any specifically in chat, and I don't have anything in particular at the moment.
Alright, sounds good to me. So on the right here, we can see this little leaf particle image.
Oh, actually,
Oh, yeah.
one question.
Yep.
Do these triggers work via camera position or player position?
That is a good question. Let's find out. So I will put this camera way the heck up here so that they're not in the triggers. Or actually, let me just move these triggers down so I don't have to do that so high. Right. And then I will make this a connect. Alright, so now it seems they are based on player position because my camera did not enter these trigger areas. Here, I can make it even more clear by turning on camera. And triggers.
Yeah, and that seems to be what chat thinks is player.
Yeah, so seems to be player based. Alright.
Good to know.
Yeah. Oh, and I don't want these exploding leaves on screen while I'm looking at stuff, so I'm going to apply this particle state. And then that lets me see this particle's behavior. And then you can use that also if you're like just juggling, modifying a few of these. You can switch back and forth between which one you're modifying. What's the difference between capture and apply particle state? Yeah, that's all right. So capture particle state is for saving the trigger. So once you've made some changes in the editor menu, you come back here and you save it with capture. Apply is for looking at different triggers. So for example, when I look at this, it doesn't just apply immediately like fog triggers do. I guess because that would be really distracting or something. So you might not always want that. I guess because like you have to manually capture, you could accidentally look at a new particle trigger and apply it, and then suddenly all your changes are gone, and nobody would want that. So apply particle state is for just seeing what they do in the editor. When you're actually playing, they just apply when you walk into them, but you can't really walk into them when you're in the editor, so yeah. It's meant for just looking at what they do. And then if I go into the particle editor menu after applying a state, then it shows me all of my options over here. And if I go to this one, hold up, apply, and then, oh, maybe I have to reselect it or something? Yeah, there we go. So I had to click it again. The menu was kind of looking at the old data, but just clicking this trigger again made it update. All right, apply state, open the editor, click this, now the menu's back to normal. Okay, so this leaf particle here is the same as this leaf particle on this menu here. So this list is every particle group in the game. So there are some particles that don't just exist by themselves. Sometimes you have particles that only exist in a group. I'm trying to think of an example.
Matter, yes, it has to be Dustmod because it's a Z trigger type.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the interaction is on vanilla.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that the interaction on vanilla is they just get ignored. So you can still have these in your vanilla map, it just won't apply the particle changes, so only people on Dustmod will see it. It's kind of similar to sublayer fog triggers that way, which, who knows, we might talk about some other time.
Those are really neat.
Yeah. So if we look at this spark trigger, we can see that not all of the sparks look the same. They're kind of moving sort of fast. So let me actually slow this down. I'll talk about this later, but so we can see that some of these sparks are kind of like big, bright white sparks, and then some of the other ones are like smaller, more orange looking things. And so that is because if we go into here, if we look at this spark thing, we can see that there's 3 different types of spark particles that this trigger is generating. So there's big sparks, medium sparks, and small sparks. And we can change which particles this group uses. So, for example, let's say we don't actually like these big sparks. We can just kind of get rid of them, and we can only have these smaller sparks. Or let's say we want to repurpose the spark trigger entirely. We're not actually using sparks in our map, but we do need an alternate way to make waterfall particles. We can do that as well. And then this group here can be used for multiple different types of emitters over on the left. So if we want to say this polygon ground, instead of using normal polygon things, we want it to make polygons and these waterfall particles we just described. Then we can come over here and we can right click this, and that will add it to this emitter type. So now we've added another group of particles to this emitter, and it emits both. And we can control the settings for each of these separately.
Yeah, and one of the maps I've seen that does this pretty well is Clockwork by Dello, which I think we might show off later.
Yeah, or we could show it off now, really. Why not?
Yeah, just hit save on this map and show that map, because I think that map shows what you're trying to say really well.
Let's... Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I've lost my changes, but that's fine. Alright. So if we take a look at this, let's get rid of these tool display things. So we can see a few different particle effects right off the bat. One of them is the dust here has been retextured sort of to look like oil, and we can see that the particles coming off of it looks like oil drips. Same with the entities. And then the other one we see immediately is the kind of steam coming out of this vent, and we see that it's moving extremely slowly. Let's find another vent. There we go. So the particles are changing very slowly and moving very slowly. And if we open up the particle editor, we can see that this is actually a polygon's ground trigger. So here we've removed the particle for polygons entirely, and it's just the waterfall particle. And
that's another really interesting thing you can do with it, is you can repurpose just about any emitter to do whatever you want it to do with this.
Yeah, so if you find that you need more emitters than you think you have access to, then you can always just repurpose one that you're not using. And one more emitter type that is in this map that's kind of more subtle that I just noticed later the other day is these little leaves around this checkpoint post. So just kind of like adding to the glow effect of it. It's just little, little wisps. So there's a lot of like small details in this map, and it's really nice. Spend a long time just looking at the whole thing. I think those are the three main kind of particle effects in this map, though.
Yeah.
I might as well just use this and continue with my talking about these things. So, yeah, we talked about how you can change the particle groups over here. If we click on this, then it'll highlight it, and so we can see the settings on the right here and where it is in the list. And we can right-click this to add more particles if we want, and then we can right-click over here to get rid of them if we need to. You can add the same particle group multiple times if, for example, you just want different settings over here for each one. So say we want some of the particles to move up, some of them to move right, some of them to move left.
Matter they can't normally. That's an advanced tools feature.
Oh yeah. I could quickly... I don't want to use advanced tools too much here, but because it's not required for the other stuff that we're talking about. But if I turn on, oh right, that's not the right thing. I keep forgetting. Don't turn it on as a regular plugin. Turn it on as an editor plugin. There we go. So now we have the advanced tools menu. If we place an emitter, Then we have the ability to resize it and also rotate it diagonally. So it's very fancy. And this is actually another way of controlling the direction the particles move, because the particles move in the direction of this arrow. That's like the up direction of the particle editor.
Oh, for slanted dust, it probably happens by default, yes.
Oh yeah, those are just built-in emitters for the dust itself. So if we go back to the F5 menu, yeah, dust on slope walls, those just automatically get a sloped trigger, and we can see that it's a slime wall emitter.
Yeah, and to add to that, emitters in general apparently have a rotation variable, which is just never used
Yeah,
outside of automatic emitters.
I guess, yeah, these automatic ones, they needed a rotation to get this to happen, but in the normal editor, you don't really have access to the rotation of the emitters. So I mentioned how you can kind of right-click these to add more groups to your emitter in case you want to like set their variables separately. So you want some of them going left and some of them going right. You can do that by just adding more groups. And then you can remove them by right-clicking these. Or say you wanted multiple different types of particles, you can do that too. And you can control their density separately. So like I want this to be mostly these wisps and then a few of these waterfall particles. You can do that too and have kind of mixed triggers. One thing to note though is that these groups are controlled globally. So if you have like this slime particle here, if you're using it for multiple emitter types, then when you change it over here on this right menu, that will change it for all of your emitters. So you got to be a little bit careful with that. Otherwise you might change something that you thought you've already finished with. All right, let's head back to the other map. All right, so next thing I'll mention is these sliders up here. Unless there are any questions about this kind of menu here with all the different particle groups, or this list here of all the different particles. What happens if I just put way too many particles in a group?
I don't know, Skyhawk, what does happen?
I don't know, let's find out. I'm curious. It looks a little messy, I'm gonna admit that.
Now you just need to increase the density by a ton as well.
Yeah, there we go. Good idea. And then direction is anything. Speed is high. Beautiful.
Creates a masterpiece, Skyhawk. That's what it does.
Alright.
I would imagine it probably chooses randomly between the particles on...
Yeah, I think it's evenly distributed between every one of these particle types. We'll just leave that there. Alright. Okay, so let's talk about all of these sliders. There are a lot of them here. First, we have to make sure that we're on the right particle.
Matter Monkey, yes. You can make the groups be whatever you want them to be.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
set up in a certain way at the start in groups that make logical sense for Dustforce normally. But at the end of the day, you can make any emitter do anything.
Yeah, these images are just to kind of show you what it is set to currently. Like, if I remove the polygons from this polygon emitter, then the image is now just blank, and I can fill it with anything else. But I will leave it as polygons for now, because they're good at showing behavior.
Yes, they are.
Alright. So, first thing up here, start frame. This is just, or I guess these whole group of sliders here are to control the animation. So you can see how each particle here is kind of twirling around. you might not want to have them all start on the exact same frame. Maybe that looks too uniform. And so it can randomly pick which frame it starts on here. If I change it and so that they all start here, it's kind of hard to see because they move very fast, but they're all starting at the same particle image. And the next thing that you can kind of control with that is how fast they spin. So if I want to move this very far left, maybe I want them to barely animate at all. Or just not animate at all. Let's just make it so that they all start here. Well, it seems like they are actually using different images still. Oh, that's because there's two different polygons, of course. So yeah, we have this kind of bigger polygon and then the smaller triangle one. I can change it so that it's all just one. And there we go. Now we get a super uniform particle trigger. But if we want to make them maybe start on different frames of the animation, there we go. Now we get some kind of smaller diamonds and bigger ones, and it looks a little more natural. And then we can change their speed so that they start to move. Maybe make it so they move a bit too fast. Beautiful. And the other thing here is loop. So once they reach the end of their animation, if this is on, then they'll just loop back to the beginning of it. If this is off, then they will just disappear. So we'll notice immediately it gets a lot more sparse just because the animation happens for each particle and then they disappear. So if you're ever wondering why your particles seem like they're just not sticking around as long as you want them to, it's probably a loop thing. Rotation speed. Let's turn down the animation again so that it's easier to look at just the rotation. Let's turn down the density a little bit as well. Alright, so we can see that some of the particles here are spinning a little bit. Let's make it a little bit more obvious. There we go. So now they're all spinning clockwise. To the right here is clockwise, to the left here is counterclockwise, and again you have your min and max bounds, so you can set a range. So you can have any kind of rotation here you want. This rotation thing here is for what rotation they start in. So here it's set to anything because the main one is up and the bounds are down. But again, we can right click this and we can change the bounds. So say we want all the particles to start facing up, and then we want all the particles to never rotate ever. Oh, interesting. They still seem to be changing occasionally. I wonder if that's because of these flips. Yeah, there we go. So now they are all exactly the same. Interesting. I thought that flip just forced them to be flipped, but it seems like it just allows them to choose randomly to be flipped, which probably makes more sense.
Yeah.
Because you get more variety. Okay, cool. So there's a lot of bells and whistles with this thing, and it's kind of hard to know what they all do. But you just kind of play with it in the moment, and then you figure it out, and you accomplish what you had in mind. Alright, let's change this again to get more random, so that we can see a more natural thing with the next one. Animation speed, start frame, looping. Alright, these scale ones are really cool. So,
you should increase the density as well.
oh, yep, good call. Maybe not that much. Alright. So, scale start controls the size of the particles. So if I move it to the right here, particles get huge. So we just get massive virtual polygon particles. And then opposite, if we move it to the left, we get itty bitty little particles. And then here again we have min and max bounds, so we can control it and have random sizes. So maybe you think that looks more kind of natural, or it's more interesting than just having all the same size. And then here we control not just the scale, but the width and the height separately, and you can make some really cool particles with this. So if I change X, then we get, let's maybe make this smaller so we can see more individual particles. Actually, it's kind of hard to notice with these ones. What ones was I using the other day? Let's
Leaves.
leaves, yeah. Let's go leaves. There we go. Look at those. So we got super long leaves now. Or we could do the opposite. Instead of changing length, we could change width. And we can have super wide, stout leaves. And then there are these sliders here for end, and I assume that just based on the naming here that these are supposed to change the scale over time of the particles. So like when they spawn in, they're really wide, but then when they kind of go through their animation, they get really tall instead. But I've messed with these and they don't seem to actually function. So maybe somebody else can chime in and explain how these work. But as far as I'm aware, they don't do anything. So you can just ignore these end ones. Alright. And for the final slider here is the lifetime. So normally we can see the particle kind of goes through its animation and then it slowly disappears. Yeah, okay. So we have another confirmation that these are just never implemented. Alright, so the lifetime, yeah, you can see that after a little while the particle kind of fades out of view, just fades into non-existence. And that's what this lifetime slider controls. So if you move this further right, then the particles will stick around longer before they disappear. And we can see that they start rising quite a bit higher above the emitter, just because they are living longer.
Another amazing way to increase density as well.
Yeah. And actually, we saw earlier with the jaunt and how it had particles going around in a circle. One of the ways that it kind of prepares for that with the particles is making the lifetime super long. That way, each particle can make at least one full rotation around that circle that it had. And it won't just disappear halfway through. Otherwise, you would end up with a weird semicircle looking thing, and it wouldn't be nearly as cool. And again, you have to make sure that you have loop on, otherwise the animation will end early, and having a long lifetime won't mean anything. So we can see it's much less dense here now just because the animation is ending for the particle. But if we loop, then the animation never ends, and it lives for its full lifetime. Yeah. So that is all of these image settings. So the animation and the size really is the main two groups of controls here. There we go. Alright.
Why don't we go into movement now?
Yeah, so there's one more tab, one final tab of controls, and that is the movement here. So if we come back to our particle trigger here, interesting. Oh, I see. Yeah, so even though I had this guy selected, I was still editing these leaves. So I had to make sure that if I wanted to edit this guy's particles, I have to make sure that this is the particle group that's selected. Then I can change his controls. I was like, why weren't these changing? But anyway, that's all that it was. Alright, so I come back over here, I select this leaf particle so that I'm editing the right thing. I bring it back to a more normal scale. And I change its lifetime to be more normal. Oh, and then I get them off screen so that they unload. There we go, now we have more normal leaves again. Alright, so movement here is to control, once they spawn in, how do they move? Gravity is for what acceleration is applied to them. So if we have a really high thing, even though the leaves are moving up, eventually they get pulled down, and you can change how strong of a force of gravity. So we can see that they kind of, if I changed it to be more diagonal here, you can see they kind of travel in an arc. They move up and then they fall down. So I believe the oil particles in Della's map that we were looking at have higher gravity. Import a custom sprite for particles. Unfortunately, you are limited to this list of sprites. There is not currently a way to add custom particles through this menu. If you want a custom particle image, then you have to handle it separately. But you can still get quite a lot of variety with these controls. Alright.
Yeah, you can do a surprising amount of things with the particles you have in game.
Yeah.
Similar to how you can do a surprising amount with props.
Yeah, props and fog triggers, and yeah, just a surprising amount of nuance to each of them. I'll be showing off more examples of what you can do with particles after this. Just more interesting maps that have a lot of particles in them. So select this again. So yeah, we can control the gravity here. We can even change the gravity direction. Like say we want everything to be pulled to the right. That can happen too. Friction is for controlling how their movement changes, like slows down. So here they're all moving up and to the left, and if they lived long enough, then they would just keep moving that direction forever. But let's say we want to add some X friction so that they stop moving left. Now they kind of start moving perfectly up. They start and spawn in with a little bit of left movement, and then they slowly lose it, and now they're just moving up. So if we wanted to have like a spread kind of thing going on here, then there we go. We can see that they spread out, but then they all are limited to this. So if you had some kind of smoke thing, I think that would make sense. Y friction is the same, but for Y. So they kind of stop moving up. Everything just explodes out, and then it slows down to a stop until it disappears. And wind scale is a really interesting one. So let's slow these down, and let's lower the friction. So this is how much these are affected by wind triggers. So when I attack...
Reminder that
yeah.
leaf particles aren't great for this.
Yeah, some particles seem to just inherently be more affected by this than others, or maybe it's just I was not working with the settings right. But yeah, so when you attack or when you have a wind hitbox, it pushes around the particles. So let's apply particle state. Let's grab a slime particle, slime ground. There we go. So normally, these are not affected by wind. I can't push these particles around. But if I go to my particle editor, I click this, I select this group, I lower the friction first of all, and then I increase the wind scale. So now they are very susceptible to moving based on wind. And then I come back to my particle trigger and I save these changes, capture. Now, they move quite a bit when I attack them.
Yep, and you can see this even more if you use a wind generator as well.
Yeah, so that is all of the settings in this particle menu. So we have our list of emitters. Within each emitter, we have settings for each particle group. On the right, we have all of the existing particle groups, which can each have multiple particles. Each particle group has its own image settings and its own movement settings, and that is everything. It's a lot to kind of keep all in your head, but if you just focus on each part individually and don't worry about kind of like the things that you're not working on at the moment, then it's easier to manage. So like a lot of the time, all you need is just these sliders here on the left. How is that circle of particles achieved? Oh, like when they were exploding out in all different directions? Or do you mean something else? Hello, Tempest. At the beginning I showed a map. Oh yeah, okay, so that circle. That is exactly what I'm going to talk about next. So here we had the wind scale was how much that the particles are pushed around by wind. There is a way to just generate wind. So if we come down here, another trigger is this Z wind trigger, generator. And in comparison to the particle editor, it is very simple looking. We have two controls here. One is force, one is direction. This is the direction of the wind that pushes the particles, and this is how strong it is. So if I drag it all the way left, it like barely pushes them. If I drag it all the way right, it really pushes them. And so if I move this particle, or sorry, this wind generator over these particles, there we go. We can see that the wind pushes the particles to the left because that's the direction we've set. And if I wanted to, for example, have a circle of these, first of all, let's change the lifetime so that these particles stick around for a really long time. And then
you have
let's...
loop on currently as well?
that is a
okay.
good question. Yes, loop is on. So now if I place some wind generators, I can... Oh, that's bigger than I wanted it to be. There we go. So let's have this one, and it can push them left. And then we can have another one, and this can push them down. And then we can have another one, and this can push them right. And then we can have, it's already starting to look like a circle. And wind generator, last one, this one pushes them up. And there we go.
And obviously to get it looking as good as it looks in the jaunt, you would have to mess with it a bit. But...
yeah, so it's kind of hard to fiddle with these and get them looking exactly as you like, but if you just kind of tweak them and move them around, then you can get kind of a nicer particle. Like, say this force needs to be a bit higher maybe to get them not clumping up in this side of the circle. Or maybe it needs to spend more time getting this force direction, and so we can move these in this direction and kind of just tweak it that way. And so if we go back to the jaunt and we look at its circle, then we can see we have quite a bit more than 4 wind triggers. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, just 5. And then, yeah, that just gives you more control over where they're moving. And we can see, actually, this is kind of interesting. I haven't really noticed this before. The particles live just long enough to make one full rotation, and then they kind of start disappearing down here. Which is neat. I guess because otherwise they would fly off here and kind of ruin the circle. Oh, I'm not on the camera path. There we go. If wind triggers overlap, they just add? Yes. Yeah, they are additive force. But yeah, I think that is everything that I wanted to explain.
Yeah, I think that is too. Let's show a couple more maps.
Sounds like a good idea.
Fake Ship by Epon is one that comes to mind.
Sure. So this one kind of shows off how you can mess with the default emitters. So all of the dust here, all of the dust blocks, all of the entities, they've kind of had their emitters modified so that instead of the normal leaf particles, you've got these firefly glowing effects.
Which almost gives kind of a gold dust impression to it.
Yeah. So if we take a look at some of these in the particle editor menu, we can see that it's using this group here that has leaves and fireflies. So that's how you get these kind of just leaves coming off of it, and then fireflies when it goes away. And or I guess the oh, actually no, this isn't quite right. So that is true of just the static particles. Like you can see how there's the particles that are just around when the block is here, but the particles that appear when you kill the entity is a different emitter. So if we come to this list on the left, oh, here we go. So normally this is Critter 44, but then there is another one called Cleansed. Or is it Hit? Yeah, so Hit 2 and Cleansed 2. So you can see that when it's cleansed, normally this would be the same leaf particle, but this map has changed Cleansed 2 so that instead, when you kill something, it emits these fireflies, and only fireflies. So that's how you get this kind of exploding effect, where you get these really dense fireflies when you kill something. So that's kind of an interesting thing, is sometimes you might not be able to just see the emitters because they don't exist statically in the map. So you'll have to take an eye or take a look at this list and see just what emitters are available to be edited.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, there are some specific ones I wanted to mention that are not very often used. For example, there's an apple trigger here, and it has no particles in it. And if we place an apple, it's not emitting any particles. What's up with that? If we come back to our particle map, let's place an apple, and then let's go into this particle editor, and we can right-click one of these. There we go. Now apples emit particles. And we can do the same thing for not just apple entities, but also, if I can find it in this list, here we go, Dustman Trail. This is a really neat one. So let's just have it go like that. So Dustman Trail, as you might expect, are particles that follow Dustman. And this is an effect that I think very few maps have used, but it is available in the particle editor. So I think you could do a lot of cool stuff with this effect.
Question from the chat, Skyhawk. The Z-Wind physics trigger.
Yeah, Z-Wind
what
physics.
What all does that allow you to do?
Yeah, so here is the list of controls for Z-Wind physics. It's maybe a bit more complicated than it needs to be, but I've actually... What's up?
It can apply for all characters except for virtual characters that are not Dustman.
Yeah, so we've got separate ones here for man, girl, kid, worth, V Dustman, and that's it. No V Dustworth, no V Dust girl. So it seems kind of like an oversight that those ones are missing.
For some reason, just that virtual Dustman.
Yeah. But yeah, you could just, with the particle editor and nothing else, you could have unique trails for each character, depending on which one they decide to play as. They've also got the boss characters here, Least Right, Dust Wraith, Slime Boss, Trash King. But they're not together in here. The numbers are all weird.
And apparently C says that player emitters have issues with checkpoints, if he remembers correctly.
Ah, interesting. Well, that'll be something to mess with, I suppose. I won't mess with it right now on stream. As for the wind physics trigger, I suppose you can kind of just play with these, but I personally am not really sure how these would affect stuff.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure either. These variables don't have extremely obvious names to me.
They certainly look like physical properties, but I could not really tell you what they do.
Nor could I off the top of my head.
Tempest says this trigger blows. Agreed.
No, Temp, that's the wind generator, not the wind physics trigger.
Alright. Next map I want to show off is Repel by Towley. And this one focuses more on the wind trigger effects rather than the particles themselves. So here we have a really nice effect with the leaves all following the same path down the mountain.
Yeah. And I think this is an effect that's been done by a couple of people at this point, but,
Yeah.
really all you're doing here is increasing the life and then directing them in a certain path.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have all of these different wind triggers to kind of make them follow a path. And I think this is kind of a unique way of showing the path of the level without like using arrows and things. And there's not even any like extra emitters here. This is just the leaves emitted by the dust and the entities.
Yeah.
So you get this kind of clump of them when you kill a bunch of things. If you're moving fast enough, they all clump together. Oh, nice phantom porcupine.
Porks are wonderful, aren't they?
Oh, super wonderful. Alright. Next one. This is kind of a more subtle effect, but from the Enable Disable pack, this is one that I remembered is this particle effect right here. So again, it's using just higher lifetime and wind particles, or wind generators to kind of control the flow of the particles. And I think it's just a really nice subtle effect. This is a more recent map from the DLC. And this one has a lot of particles. C does a lot of work with the different particle types. So we can see again we have kind of these particles moving in the path of the map to kind of show a direction. And then we also have these kind of shooting star particles coming off of each of the prisms.
I think this also changes the polygon destroy particles as well.
It almost seems like, yeah, I guess it's these tiny little dots. Yeah, so it's just spawns a bunch of little glint particles and uses those as stars.
I would guess, having not looked into this map a ton, part of it is probably the static stars that you can get in the sky, but a lot of this is actually just emitters.
Yeah, so it looks like these ones are sun particles. Or, I mean, not particles, sun props. Just made really small. Oh. Okay, they're on 18.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, there we go.
No?
But yeah, we have kind of mixed, like these ones are particles and the path is particles. So we can see if we look at the emitters here, we've got kind of a trail of emitters going through the map, and we've actually got some in the background too. If I find out which layer these are, it seems like there are multiple layers. There we go. That's what I wanted to see. So in the background we have just kind of like static star shining things in the background. It looks like the level type has been set to Dustmod, so if you ever want to make sure that people experience the map the way you designed it with all of these particles and things, you can set the map type to Dustmod, and that will make sure that people can only play the map in Dustmod. It just will not run in vanilla. So
yeah, I don't imagine this map would be very enjoyable in vanilla.
Yeah.
Much as I hate to say it that way.
Yeah. So if you don't like really mind if people play the map without your particle work or your fog trigger work that uses special Dustmod features, you can just leave it as normal and then it'll work either way. But yeah, if you want better control over stuff, then you want to set it to Dustmod. And I think if you want to use these scaled particles, then you have to set it to Dustmod. Scaled
you
props,
use scaled
sorry.
props, you have to use Dustmod.
Yeah. I keep saying particle. It's got particles on the brain.
I mean, it's basically a particle in this application.
Yeah. Alright. Next one's very similar style. C has made a few maps with this kind of aesthetic.
Yeah, and here this is custom particles are being used in these background layers, as well as it looks like on Prism Destroy as well.
Yeah. I think the other one for the DLC, though, is definitely an improvement over this map because it added that path of particles to kind of direct you through the map. I think the visibility here is a bit lower.
Yeah, I agree. But still, beautiful looking map.
Absolutely.
Honestly.
Just the glow effects really look good. Next one is team building. I don't know if I want to just... sure. Why not? What's the harm? Warning for violence if anybody cares. Alright, so this map has a few different particle things. One of them is just similar to how the oil drip was in Della's map. We have some kind of drip effects in the particles here. I think? Yeah, there we go. So just here are some raining drip particles. And then we have destroyed particles here. So when you destroy the dust blocks, they have kind of a custom particle effect. And let's go through the last few maps. I've got, I think, 3 more that I want to look at. Or 2 more. Yep. Alright, so this next one is from a recent CMR. And here we've got a few different particle effects.
Yeah, this one is kind of similar to Shake Ship in what they've done here.
Yeah. So we've got, again, the kind of glowing dust, but then another neat thing, I think, is the background effect. With the kind of everything moving in one direction. I think it adds just kind of some intensity to the map, I would say.
This is such an amazing map in so many ways, in my opinion.
Another thing that I believe this map does, so not only do we have just emitters literally everywhere, but I think we have the particles get more intense as you go through the map. So you start with just like a few of these background particles, and then as we make our way through. Oh,
And honestly, for me, this is just such a great example of a map that could be, like, almost kind of dull aesthetically without these kind of small little things.
yeah, because like it would just be a very static virtual map without these particles, but just adding the motion to it like this.
But yeah, this is, like, honestly one of my favorite maps.
Yeah. So you can see how there are multiple triggers throughout the map, and they kind of change the speed of the particles. So sometimes they're moving fast, sometimes they're moving slow.
Yeah, and then once you get to the end, you get some different particles as well. Because you start getting the wind pushing back on you.
Yeah, and you get that shake effect, which is a different thing. And we get these sparks from the dust. It's very well handled particles.
Yeah, this is a fantastic example of using particles.
Alright, and the final map I want to look at is another star-themed map by Sea. And this one, I think, is a lot more subtle than the previous map. Nice dwarf. Alright, so the particle effect I want to look at here is these stars in the background. So here we just have a very uniform direction and length, and then they just kind of like blink into existence and disappear. So we saw how kind of random particles can look good, but here also it's just very uniform particles, kind of give it direction and can look good as well, and just have this nice subtle effect. Yeah. And I think that is all the maps I wanted to look at.
Yeah, that's all I had.
Alright,
What emitter are they coming from in this
let's
case?
check this out. These are firefly emitters, but they have been changed so that they are not using fireflies anymore. They're using this glint particle. So if we look at the Y scale, it's been set very high, so that's why they look really long.
And to answer the second part of your question, Matter, it looks like it's a couple of emitters across the entire map.
Yeah. The problem I think with having just one huge emitter is that it could unload potentially. I believe. Yeah, so notice how if they get too far off screen they kind of disappear. That's them unloading. And unloaded triggers do not make particles. Unloaded emitters, excuse me. Yeah. So yeah, breaking it up into smaller groups like this is generally a good idea, good practice. Yeah, exactly. Death zones have the same problem. Yeah. Alright, I think I will return to the beginning. I will return to the jaunt and we will close out the stream. Alright. If there are any questions from the chat, feel free to ask them, and I can answer any questions that people have left.